All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Equip Thursday Public Family Support Group. I'm JD Ouellette. I'm the Director of Lived Experience here at Equip, and I'm here today and again with Cher Feldman, one of our dietitians, who's always wonderful to have on. This is just a general Q&A today. So for anybody who might be new to this, you are welcome to use the Q&A, the chat box to ask questions. You're more than welcome to come on camera if you would like to, or to just speak. And you can use the little hand raise function if you're not sure about that. If you have comments that you want to be anonymous, you can submit them anonymously, so there's no name attached. And as always, you'll get an email with some resources. I'll take some notes during this hour about things that we talk about, so we can send out a few resources. And yeah, Amy, why don't you kick us off? Hand raise. It's also possible, and happens every now and again.
There
you go.
Yeah, I don't really have a question. I was just, I heard you say about the tomato allergy, and I was allergic for a while and it went away. That's all.
Thank you. That's super helpful. For folks who don't know, we were sort of chatting about it. My 7-month-old granddaughter had tomatoes today for the first time and has reacted to them. And I was saying tomatoes would be an awful thing to be allergic to. And these happen to be fresh tomatoes out of our garden, which would be even worse, because fresh warm tomatoes are delicious. That's good to know. Anybody have any topics that they want to start us off with? Any questions, things happening? I don't know if Amy's still showing up on the screen, and I don't know how to get her.
I can try. So Amy, if I do this and you accidentally get kicked out, come right back, because I'm clearly not trying to kick you out, but I'm going to see if, so hopefully you stay.
Yeah.
Yay, you're still there.
Yay.
Okay.
Well, let's see, while we wait for some questions. Oh, here's something that comes in. This will be excellent for you. Is there any kind of antiemetic that works for ARFID? So for people who might not be familiar, emesis is throwing up or vomiting. And so you can provide us more context if you want on this one, but I'm going to assume it's a form of ARFID. Potentially that is emetophobia or fear of vomiting, that kind of thing. For folks who might not know, ARFID, or avoid and restrictive food intake disorder, can take several forms, sort of generally lack of interest ARFID, sensory sort of ARFID, and then some sort of traumatic ARFID, as well as a lot of times folks have like real genuine fear of food develops because of allergies or medical conditions, things like that. What are your what's your experience in this?
Yeah. So I don't know of like one thing that's like typically used for that. I think obviously there's a lot of nuance in there. If someone's having a lot of nausea, Zofran, for a lot, depending on age, can definitely be a helpful piece, I think, for a lot of people. Again, nausea is definitely much more of a piece that you can focus on versus like the actual like throwing up. Foods with ginger in it, for anyone that's been pregnant before, you know that's often recommended for nausea throughout pregnancy, but that actually does have a lot of research behind it too. And most folks with ARFID are not going to be super open to the flavor of ginger because it's really strong and potent and doesn't always work. But so the short answer is I'm not familiar with anything for the actual like throwing up emesis piece, antiemetic, but anti-nausea meds definitely can be used with nausea is the piece that's there.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. There's a presentation I went to some time ago where the authors of a book on CBT for ARFID talked a lot about, and even with kids, using ways to induce some nausea and some that feeling simply in order to then like write it out and get that feeling of you can survive it as well. So that was really interesting. So I'll include the name of that book. I thought their presentation was fantastic. It's a couple of professors at Harvard. And interestingly enough, one of the exercises that they did was to give people something to drink and spin them around in a chair, which sounds awful, but to induce the nausea and then cope with it. And then they would sort of continue to build that feeling. So I thought that was a very interesting approach. Let's see. Any other questions coming in? Or maybe you can, kind of touch on, share what are some of the concerns, sort of around this time of year or whatever that you're hearing, just in general.
Yeah, summertime definitely brings up more body image concerns for a lot of folks, just different clothing that's worn. I think the piece that like jumps to my mind is so indicative of me being in the Midwest, because I like think of it's like state fair and county fair and festival season and all of the challenges that come up with food around that, because they are typically foods that are offered that are more challenging to someone with an eating disorder. I feel like I've also just had some conversations with families recently about that. So that's probably why it's like top of mind for me. But I think it's one that a lot of like kids with eating disorders or anyone with an eating disorder feels like they kind of miss out on some of those experiences with friends or family, because it is overwhelming. But I think that's a good one to if that's what your family always does. If you go to I grew up where the state fair was in Illinois, and now I live where the state fair is in Minnesota. So like, I'm not even that into the state fair, and I talk about it all the time.
I've been to the Minnesota State Fair a couple times because we have family there, and you take it very seriously there.
It's a jolly good time. But it is fun, and I know a ton of families that do that and that go to, like I said, go to fairs and whatnot, and don't be afraid of those foods if that's what you used to do as a family.
Yeah. And that's great. And there's some things you can do too. Like maybe if you normally would, I don't know, I'm just going to use a churro because I'm in San Diego and that comes to my mind, right? So maybe if you eat your churros walking down the Midway or something like that, maybe this year you get your churros and then you go find like the quietest spot that you can away from everyone else and do that.
Yeah.
Or maybe if there's some certain kind of, food is going to be there, maybe you kind of try and replicate it at home and eat it the week before and sort of set yourselves up for success. But yeah, food focus and bathing suit season, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Question, this is such a good one about, do you have any tips for dealing with extreme mental hunger in recovery? I often feel physically full, but I still have super strong cravings and constant thoughts about food.
Yeah, so super common. Just keep eating. I mean, obviously when you're physically full, if you've had whatever your body needs in that moment, like listen to that. But then like if you are having a craving for a certain food, eat that, even if you have it multiple times in the same day. Because I think when our brain is telling us like, eat, like I want this, I want this, I want this, if we don't listen to that, ultimately it's going to kind of kick us in the butt at some point. And then obviously making sure that you are nourishing yourself when you are eating, because we know during that, even if you're not weight restoring, just as you're normalizing eating, like you might feel full, but your body might still nutritionally need more and calorically need more. So both of those things kind of come into play, and obviously your whoever's on your team will be able to help you navigate that or help your loved one. It sounds like it might be for you yourself. So
I actually really even like the way this is phrased, because I don't even think a decade ago when we were going through this, like I never heard the term mental hunger. Or even extreme hunger wasn't really a term that I heard, and I'm so glad it's been introduced into the lexicon, and also with an acknowledgement that mental hunger isn't a bad thing, and involving that scarcity mindset. And also it makes sense that if you've been in deficit for a long time, both, sort of energy wise, calorically, and also just from the scarcity of these foods that your brain might enjoy, it makes sense that you're going to want a lot more of them. I will share from personal experience in my daughter's recovery after she was like really and truly fully weight restored, after we experienced quasi recovery and then recovery. About a 3-month long period of just eating absolutely everything and all kinds of foods that weren't even the stuff that she'd really liked a lot as a kid, like more of a salty person than a sweet person, but all of that kind of thing. And it was just really interesting to watch. And I'm a big believer in honoring that as part of the process. And she also describes that she felt like it was a really good way to, for lack of a better way to put it, I guess, like give the middle finger to the eating disorder every single day, multiple times a day. And that was really an important part of recovery. So it's great that you are honoring those. And it sounds like keeping to do that would be a really good thing. Bill is saying that the sound isn't super great. And that might be true. I'm in a hotel room and I don't have my regular setup. So I don't know. How am I coming for you, Shira?
I can hear you okay, but it also, it looks like I'm the one that's not talking loud enough. So I will do my best to speak up, and I might have been too far away from my.
Okay. And Sarah, who has your hand raised, we'll get to you in just a moment. Take a couple of these questions that were in here. Is it common to have ARFID with anorexia, and how is it diagnosed? Do you want to start that one?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of commonalities between them. I mean, diagnosis, there are certain criteria that are met to get that actual diagnosis for either one. Like diagnostically speaking, I do think more and more often we are seeing individuals that have an ARFID diagnosis and have some element of body image distress, which typically hasn't been included with ARFID and has been left out of treatment. So I think more and more kids and adults and everybody that has ARFID, like everyone still lives in our culture and our society that is very focused on what we look like. And then depending on the presentation of ARFID, if there's a lot of those sensitivities, it can even be like sensitivities to how like you feel in your body. And I was just listening to another, it was on autism and eating disorders and talking about like the kind of crossover with that, but then also the crossover with like neurodivergence, which is another piece of autism. And then even with non-binary and trans individuals, so like a lot of crossover where those individuals are at higher risk for ARFID diagnoses, which might also come along with some body image disturbances.
Yeah.
So
I'm anecdotally, I would say in my experience with peer groups and things like that, that it's definitely not an uncommon thing to happen to either, as you said, have the ARFID become sort of draw more of those issues in, or for it to become actually anorexia. So that's a really great question.
should I go to Sarah?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. All right.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. I am very new to all of this. I'm seeking a treatment for my 15-year-old son, who I believe started out mostly just restricting calories, and it sort of progressed very recently into more binging and purging. And as I'm working on getting into the program or a program, I'm wondering what I should be doing. I've been, reading online that I should not be placing a lot of focus on those behaviors, but more so on, his general well-being and, my love for him and my, admiration for him and support, all those things. But I'm also, I'm just wondering, like, I've been trying to make sure he stays hydrated until we can get into a program. And this starts to sort of get, hopefully gets better. And just wondering, is there sort of a short list of do's and don'ts that would be good to like sort of,
Yeah.
keep in mind as I'm traveling down this road.
I think that's a really great question, and you don't have to tell us where you've been reading. In fact, it's probably a better thing if you don't. And I always want to be like really mindful that we're reading super up to date things, because from the perspective that I've had, sort of that like just focus on his, sort of general, your general validation of how much you love him. Feels to me like there's that advice sort of ignores the biology of this quite a bit. And we know that time is of the essence in, sort of getting things going. So I'm really interested to have Shira weigh in on it. I will kind of tell you what I would tell you if you were sort of on a Facebook page that we were on or something like that, which would be to that it's super appropriate for you to interrupt and try to stop behaviors like purging, because particularly purging, once it takes off, it becomes harder and harder to stop pretty much every day. And I'm also wondering if in your reading, if you've encountered family-based treatment or the FBT approach.
I mean, I think probably only on your site have I encountered that. Yeah, to be honest, I haven't gotten a lot of great information other than just sort of definitions and stuff. And so that's why obviously I'm seeking treatment for him. But yeah, I guess I'm wondering in the meantime, in the next week or so, or 2 weeks until I'm able to get him into a program, what should I be doing about the fact that I mean, for a little while, he was very uncomfortable. It sort of wasn't this way, and then it was this way, where he was uncomfortable to eat in front of anyone, and so he wasn't really. Now I think he's sort of become a little bit more comfortable with that, but there's definitely eating by himself, and I know that he's going to the bathroom after he eats, and I don't know, I don't want to make it worse, and I obviously want to make it better, so I don't know if I should be forcing him to sit with me, or I should be waking up in the middle of the night and trying to stop him. I just don't know how much of a power struggle to get into.
I really want to validate how hard it is at the beginning and how much information there is that is differing opinions and all sorts of stuff. So I want to say I'm really glad you found our way to us, because I obviously think that we're a really good source of information. And Shira, like what would be sort of advice you would give a family in this situation in general, if maybe you couldn't see them for a few weeks?
Yeah, I from like a just strict food perspective, I would say starting by being there for meals and snacks, and making sure that there's some consistent structure to when meal and snack times are. If eating in front of others is really hard, and you can definitely in the early times sort of accommodate that, but having at least you or another caregiver be present. But then I feel like I can sense that that you want to try to interrupt those behaviors afterwards. And I am such a broken record with this. I'm always like, trust your parent gut on that, because absolutely, trying to interrupt those, especially during the daytime, as that, place to start. And often we recommend just having bathroom be off limits for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes for some kids after eating, and then if your schedule allows, trying to distract afterwards and get out and do something that gets you out of the house and just changes the environment. But distraction is like just a wonderful friend during these times. And maybe your loved one will share, like, this is really hard right now, and then that, and you're like, all right, let's leave the house and just change where we're at.
Right.
I love your call to lean into the gut instinct, because you're right, that's so present in you. Like, I'm called to do these things, and I'm reading stuff, and I'm not really sure, and I love my kid a lot, and I don't want to make things worse, and I'm worried about I'm going to ruin my relationship. And it's really weird in modern society for parents to make their kids eat or monitor them in these ways and that kind of thing. so really reinforcing what Cher said, and I'll just give you some like general tips that are very frequently shared around this that are helpful. Things like showers first thing in the morning. And then there's sort of not the rest of the day because you can purge in different places. Hey, go to the bathroom before breakfast, go to the bathroom before snack, no access to the bathroom, for some time afterwards, sort of at least a good hour type of thing. And obviously the distraction, which oftentimes includes sort of a lot of supervision, a lot of time together, super helpful. And also want to prepare you for the fact that he's not likely to say, "Thanks, Mom. I was just waiting for you to supervise me and feed me more." Because that's not going to happen. And also don't be afraid that because the eating disorder starts being very upset with you, that your child under there isn't actually super relieved that this is happening. And then biologically, I wanted to say, Sharon, if you could weigh in on this, that maybe that because there was that period of restriction, so that's leading to the binging, that one of the things might be to counterintuitively feed more food.
Yeah, I do think that it's almost like there's been these larger phases of there was this extreme phase of the restriction sort of ramped up, but it ended up in this sort of extreme phase, and then I believe that the binging and the purging came, when he just couldn't handle it anymore, or just couldn't handle starving himself or not participating in, meals or things that we were doing as a family. And so then it seemed like, I'm sure in his confused mind, the perfect solution to the problem. I can eat what I want to eat and what everybody else is eating. And now he seems to have kind of become, pretty obsessed with food. And it's, he's, eating a lot at one time, and then going right to the bathroom. And like I said, I haven't been able to really find any cohesive information on what should I be doing at this time. And so I haven't really been stopping him.
I am going to recommend Dr. Lauren Mulheim's book, and normally I'd grab something off my desk and I'd show it to you, but I am not at my desk. So it's Dr. Lauren Mulheim. We'll put it in the newsletter, but also I'm just going to spell her last name for you so that you can get it. It's MUHLHEIM, and the title, it's something about teenager eating disorder.
I'm going to look it up because I have the book actually.
And for me, that book of Dr. Mulheim's or Lauren, because I'm actually friends with her, is sort of the most complete, up-to-date, sort of succinct, kind of how to get started, and just really want to empower you that you can get started today. You don't sort of have to wait for things to be very formalized to get started today and to start to interrupt it, because the longer it goes on, the harder it is to beat.
So just maybe some
Hard.
Some set of rules or something to start with.
Yeah, I mean, generally, and Dr. Mulheim's book will really lay it out in detail for you. And it's pretty common to have a schedule of 3 meals and 3 snacks a day, that you supervise, and that you, again, don't allow that access to bathroom afterwards, that you do a lot of distraction activities. And that going for a drive can be good. Siblings, puzzles, board games, just, music, sort of anything that you can think of in order to try that distraction. And then also the knowledge that him being mad at you doesn't mean it's not working. Very often him being mad at you would indicate that it is working.
Okay.
And also because you're so new to this, and I'm feeling for you just so much now. I wish we were in a real room where we could hand you a tissue and give you a hug. Where was I going to go with that? Thank you, Cheryl. When your teen has an eating disorder, I mean, just what you're experiencing is just sort of very, very common. Oh, I know what I wanted to say, because you're so new to this, and the biggest question for me, for almost everyone I knew, was if I interrupt those behaviors, make them eat, the vibe is very pissed off, right? And even hateful toward me. Am I ruining my child's relationship with me? And the answer to that is you're not. If you can think of the eating disorder as separate from him and you are interrupting what the eating disorder is doing in the service of saving your child, at the end of this, it is the greatest likelihood is that your son will be very grateful to you that you did these things, and the very hard beginning will be forgotten, or they're like, thank you for doing that, because not too many people would do that for me. So I hope that's of some comfort to you.
Okay, thank you.
There was one, I'm gonna go down, the one about, do most teens end up having extreme hunger toward and recovered, or only some? We've not experienced it. What is your experience with that, Shira? Does everyone have extreme hunger, or?
No, I definitely don't see that with every single person. I don't necessarily, I'm trying to think like anecdotally if I can like come up with like a rhyme or reason for like the type of person that has experienced that. And I think it just varies. That's a really crappy answer because it's like a non-answer.
And I think part of that question sort of is my kid going to recover if they haven't had extreme hunger? I think that's like the answer behind it. And I am actually, the webinar chat, for whatever reason, can we do that to everyone? Oh, when it went to just hosts, that's what happened. So I'm just going to repopulate it there. I've done that before. You have to go some.
Oh, oops.
No, that's okay. There we go. Now it's there. I didn't want her to think we'd forgotten about her. So do not despair if your loved one did not have extreme hunger. That does not mean that they will necessarily sort of never recover. Question from Shannon: on average, how long do you see teens suffer from trauma due to being in residential? My child won't sleep in their bed and is still very mad at us for making them stay there, holding a grudge, seems to be very hurt and still in denial that there's an eating disorder. So that brings its own set of issues. Shira, what are, you're definitely the expert on this.
You know, it sounds like with that last piece of your question, with feeling like there's a lot of denial still, I wonder if a lot of the behavior you're seeing is still more that eating disorder piece, kind of coupled with just that normal adolescent being pissed off that they were taken away from home and forced to do this thing that they really didn't want to do. And I also don't want to, by saying that, I don't want to downplay the fact that being in residential treatment is trauma. You are pulled away from everything that you know, from your loved ones. So I think it's an important piece for someone to be talking about as they're going through recovery. It's, I think, really hard to sort it out when there's still so much of the eating disorder going on in there also. So again, I'm just going to keep giving really vague non-answers for everything. So I apologize for that. But I just want to, I very much want to validate that is a true thing that for the kid, but I think for the parents too. And obviously, JD, you can speak to that a whole lot more from the parent perspective. But
yeah, and I think I also want to validate that sometimes it's necessary, you know, that yes, there may be trauma attached, and yes, that might have just been the only thing that you were able to do. One thing that I want to orient you, because this is something, I don't know that this is true for you, but it's something that we hear about from a lot of folks in various groups and things like that, is the assumption that residential fixes stuff. And so one of our family mentors has the best analogy ever. She describes residential, her child did residential and then came home and did FBT. Residential was 3 rungs up a 100 rung ladder. So instead of viewing residential as the endpoint, it's just sort of the very first beginning. So, you know, in your situation, I would sort of, you know, potentially have some questions about where we are in recovery. Do we need more weight? Or, you know, are we getting more therapy to deal with this? All of that sort of thing. And not assuming that just because they're really angry with you now, that anger will continue. because there's also a likelihood it won't. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. Bill has I mean, and this is a perennial question. This is one of the reasons, the biggest reason Equip exists. We live in a rural area with few resources. So what options are there for outpatient treatment? I think that everyone in the country would sort of like to know that right now. What are some, answers you give? And I'm going to assume, because this is someone who's been coming to the group for a while, so I'm going to assume that if they could access Equip, they'd be accessing Equip, and that it's just not covered by their insurance.
Yeah, I do think one of the benefits that came out of COVID was that there are more virtual treatment options, depending on, obviously a lot depends on insurance, but I do think there's more individual providers that are doing telehealth that could be a potential option. And then it just comes down to finding at least a provider that is eating disorder aware. And I'm going to do a little plug for dietitians here, that there are a lot of dietitians that are trained in FBT and that can really provide great care and that are doing telehealth appointments. There are some centers, I believe, too, that have both virtual and in-person options. I can't speak to all of those by any means, but I know they're out there.
One of the things, and I'm just asking this, a question that I don't answer to of you right now. So one part is I know that there's a lot more people being licensed in multiple states. So definitely look not just in your state, but outside your state. And also my understanding is it may be easier for dietitians to serve more places. Do you want to kind of speak to how that works?
Yeah. So just from like a licensing and credentialing piece, there's a just national accreditation or national credential you need to have to be a registered dietitian. And then within that, like some states have licensure. Not every state does, but you can be licensed in multiple states, even if you don't reside in that state. So just provides a lot more openness. And then there are some states where dietitians don't have to be licensed. So if you come across someone and you're in a state that doesn't have licensure, don't freak out.
Yeah, so cast a wide net, I think, would be, and then I'm always going to put in a plug for joining a parent forum or multiple parent forums. And this is my state, we can't do, don't tell me to go to Equip because my insurance doesn't cover it. So what else do you have for me? Can be helpful. So hopefully that helps you a little bit, Bill. Rachel's asking, what is the best way to help a 13-year-old with eating at home and in treatment? Any suggestions? That's a big question.
It a lot depends on what all is going on, but I think during treatment, distraction and just trying to make the mealtime as pleasant as possible for them and checking in with them on like what that might be. And definitely there's lots of families where trying to do, games or just regular old like conversation that's light and hopefully fun. And then there's other kids that like want nothing to do with that. And it is more about just here, you can watch this show. It's 30 minutes. The expectation is that you finish your meal during this time. You don't have to interact with us at all. You can listen to this music. So those are kind of the more of the distraction type of pieces. It could be the environment, if they're sensitive to different sounds. I feel like I have a ton of clients right now that are actually really sensitive to other people chewing. And that's a really big one. Some of those are kiddos with ARFID. I've seen eating disorders show up too, though, where they can't stand the eating disorder is really activated by others eating. So you might need to have them eat separate for a period of time with your supervision. So those are just some things.
And every time we mention that about the misophonia or the really having that hard time hearing people chewing, there's always like people are like, what? I didn't know that was a thing. And I think our personal experience with that is that there was probably a low level of that, that's sort of like true misophonia and present. And then the restriction magnified it so much that it became a really huge thing. So that's, if you're feeling that or hearing that, that is a true thing that's happening to them. I love all those things that you mentioned. And I love that you sort of mentioned TV, and sort of one of the things, if you're sort of a no screens at the table family, which we were, and it was a pretty much core value, put that to the side for a little bit of time, right? And it can be a great distraction, super helpful. The cards and the games, if you get like a tabletop card set, sometimes that can be helpful. Just go through them and pull out all the diety, exercisey cards. And it's that weird thing, because you said it, like, try and make the conversation as pleasant as possible. And so it's a really weird directive as a patient. Make sure they eat everything, but don't talk about food. And it sounds impossible, and you can thread that needle. And so you may have to talk about take a bite, but you're not going to talk about the composition of the food or the content of the food or things like that. So talking about music, TV, you know, different things like that, that you know that your kiddo might like, or because you're under so much pressure again and your mind goes blank, getting those tabletop cards can help. And in general with meal coaching, you know, you kind of want to be really, I was just talking about this in another group today, the 3 C's: calm, consistent, compassionate, right? And so you yourself, you know, learning to sort of like be very compassionate and calm. And when you're saying, please take a bite, please take a bite, please take a bite. And then keeping up that consistency thing. There's also, depending on where you are as well, I really like to share that you know, brought in that we might accommodate a lot of things at the very beginning, and that's not forever, that's for now. So if they go to your room, you take the food to their room and you can feed them in their room, kind of whatever seems to be working for you, and pulling back, as you said, on like, probably not the time to go to a lot of restaurants with a lot of people. Like the way a lot of us describe it is our worlds became very small, and that's okay. And I think if you know that's what's going to happen versus trying to shoehorn it into regular life, I think it helps you get through that. And being that loving person. And also one thing I think is really helpful is for you to get yourself in a mindset that if things are difficult at the table, once you get up from the table, it's all gone. No harm, no foul. It's a full reset. So things could have been said, and awful things could have been said, but you're not holding any grudges. You're just like, okay, we got the food in, that matters. And now let's go do something enjoyable. My 11-year-old is really struggling completing meals at home and trending down, looking for more strategies to encourage her. We do distractions by playing table games, watching TV, positive conversation. That's a really good question. And also I will say, you mentioned that people respond different ways, and in the ideal world, our positivity and distraction techniques would always work. And sometimes we do have to be a little bit more heavy-handed and go with some leverage. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. The piece of like, ideally some positive kind of encouragement for what the, rewards for after doing that really hard thing. And if that's not working, kind of going back to like, are there some consequences that come from not completing meals? And usually the more those can be natural consequences, that can be great. But I also know a lot of families use phone, or I think you said he was 11, so it might be more if they're into screens, like no iPad time, time with friends. If they're in activities, like we're not nourished for this, we can't do it. I think there's the piece of just like everything has to stop until we get through this meal. Like life gets put on hold until we finish these things, especially if there's that kind of, you said, that trend down in progress. And those are really hard to do. Like it's really easy to sit here and suggest these things. It's really, really hard to implement.
It is. And one thing that I found effective, and a lot of other folks I know found effective, is like having like the really high fat calorie count, whatever it is you're having, before something that somebody really wants to do. So very often, and this is in the school year, a lot of these kiddos do want to go to school. And so a lot of people will really front load. Breakfast is just really a loaded oatmeal and things like that with like, well over 1,000 calories in it, or a smoothie or something like that, so that they start off getting the bulk of those calories in at the beginning of the day. When going to school then is what happens after that. And then you're able to be slightly more normal throughout the day. So there's not as much to fight over. Or other people do like the afternoon smoothie before you can, go hang out with your friends. And smoothies and shakes are always nice because you can titrate up or down the like additions to that as time goes by. I want to read this because this is so beautiful. The one thing I have to say that the eating disorder community is just, it's like you're here for one day, and on day 2, you're already helping other people. They're just amazing people. And this is, my heart goes out to you, Sarah. I'm a year into this with my son, but I'm in tears. It's so hard, but we are seeing progress. Hearing my son laugh again. There is hope. We still have a way to go. My son's eating disorders coupled with OCD, contamination fears, and I'm just praying for the day I can hug him again. So I want to say, heart goes out to you as well. And also just recognizing the beauty of being in it yourself and being able to provide such support and hope to other people. And that's really why multifamily and this sort of format is so important. So thanks for that. I'm going to take a couple more, Sarah, and then we can have you pop on again as well. Love this comment. Residential inpatient treatment can be punitive and shaming, and it can be life-saving medically. And that is a very true thing to say. Out of curiosity, do you know when you will be offering treatment to adults older than 24 and what the vision is for what the treatment framework will look like? I am going to say to that one, I would fill out a form online and contact admissions about it, because it's, without saying too much of particulars and things like that, because this isn't really the venue, and not necessarily, I don't know that I would say everything exactly as it is, or that I'm even authorized to do so. So I would just say I would fill out a form and get more information about that. And just adding to that we are very, very well aware of the tremendous need for adults to have access to this kind of treatment as well. Brooke is asking, my 15-year-old daughter has been calorie restrictive, lost 40 pounds in the last 18 months that she gained during COVID, wants a support group online with kids. Is there any group out there or emergency numbers she can use when she feels like her head won't shut off? I'm going to speak to the online group with kids sort of thing, that I'm not sure that I know of any, and I'm not sure that online outside of a formalized program would be the best thing to do. In the context of eating disorders being very competitive. And so without an environment that is super tightly monitored, there's actually a lot of risk in that sort of, we would love it to be support, but very often people are at different stages of wellness, and it very often doesn't play out that way. I'm trying to think of, so I personally can't think of any groups off the top of my head. Can you, Shira?
No, for all those reasons that you mentioned. I was thinking, I don't know if for some reason Project Heal have anything that they have on. I was just going to look up on their website if they had anything. This is like years ago, I think, that there was something.
Well, they have, and I did a Project Heal group for family members. I'm not sure they're doing any now, and the Alliance for Eating Disorder Awareness does some groups. I don't know if they do some for teenagers, but I would check that out. The National Alliance for Eating Disorder Awareness. And then ANAD, and I'm not going to remember what ANAD stands for, was starting a mentorship program, and I'm not sure where that is. And there's always a high demand. So I think that's something to look for. And you're here so you know about Equip, but I would say that that's one of the things we provide in treatment in here.
Yeah, that made me think of, like, there are people that do recovery, like they're recovery coaches and whatnot, that have been through, their own history with the eating disorder. I think a lot depends on if your kiddo's at a level where that's all the support they need versus needing more care from other providers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Question on just how long generally asking someone to wait before going to the bathroom to prevent purging. What is the advice you give?
30 minutes to an hour is usually what I would say. And rationale for that really is that's often for a lot of people that hour time is when like those urges might have subsided enough. So that's another piece just to check in with your loved one if they know like when does the urge to want to purge decrease for them, because
Yeah.
that's helpful information too.
And I'm always going to be cautious, so I'm going to say I would vote for an hour. And also there's kind of different ways to have that supervision, because I hear that 19 as well. So it can, first of all, if you in almost all cases, if you go to the bathroom before you eat, you shouldn't need to use the bathroom within an hour after you've eaten. And also supervision could be as much as like they're keeping the room to their door open and you're, just hanging out in the same vicinity or whatever. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like you staring at them, which can feel like more intrusive, but you can find creative ways to supervise that doesn't feel quite so on point. I'm going to do this last one in a general way, and then Sarah, we're going to bring you back on. My husband and I are not on the same page with respect to FBT. The idea of externalizing the eating disorder doesn't resonate for him, and he doesn't want to damage his relationship with our daughter. He's booked a personal trainer for her and gives her privileges I think should be used as incentives, not as given. The eating disorder loves this. In addition, unwilling to give our daughter the antidepressant dosage at the level that psychiatrist recommends. I have a mix of emotions, angry, hopeless, powerless, and unsure how to influence things, and asking for suggestions. And so gonna sort of like really zoom out on that and not necessarily get into the particulars of, sort of your personal situation. Want to say that absolutely parental alignment is something that is very, very commonly not in place at the beginning of treatment. So I would sort of, kind of really recommend leaning into your FBT provider. I know my husband and I that this wasn't our area of contention, but certainly we did have them. Found it very helpful to use some sessions just with us and not with our child at all to sort of work some of this out. Going to really put in a plug for Men of Feast, which is a wonderful group run through Feast. We'll include the link in the newsletter, and you can also just Google it. Very often, I think talking to other men who have been through this really can provide some orientation around, why we do things we do and why, why we might not want to get the trainer at this point, those sorts of things. A lot of information on how it actually doesn't ruin the relationship, on how it's strengthened relationships. Because I really hear that's the question that comes up so often in the context of FBT. I don't want to ruin the relationship with my child, and this feels like it's ruining it. And it does feel like it's ruining it in the midst. So hearing from other families about that can really be really helpful. I'm also thinking of our playlist, our Equip YouTube channel has a playlist of all of these sessions that we've had. And there's several with folks who are in recovery themselves, with their parents. I'm thinking of one in particular with Jeff and Brenda and Annika, that's not too old, where all three of them are on talking about this. And I think that's a really helpful one. And because it's all three of them talking about that experience, and you're hearing her say, my parents doing this, that's what saved me. And so as much as I fought it, that's what saved me. And I think that's what gives people the most reassurance, is hearing from people who are in recovery themselves, who have been through FBT, that, oh no, far from ruining in my relationship with my parents, it actually made it a lot stronger. I'm also going to throw out into this that you might want to introduce the idea to your husband about, what about this other scenario that might happen? It might happen that you don't do this now. And then at 20, she says, why didn't you do this when I was 16? Like, now I'm an adult and I'm not able to do this because my eating disorder is running things. And now I'm really mad at you. So, sometimes when people are like, oh, I have as much chance of ruining it if I don't do it as I do it, that can introduce some, just sort of another thought process into that. And what do you, when you're working on, with families with lack of alignment in this area, what is your process for that?
yeah, and a lot of things that you said of like in anecdotally, it doesn't ruin the relationship. That like really just reiterating the things that you had just said, but a lot would be like, what's the worst that happens if you try aligning on this? Let's just try it this way. I use a lot of like, let's treat everything like this is an experiment. We know how it's going right now, the way we're doing it. Let's just try and see what happens, and let's give it a month and see where we're at. Because typically you'll start to see some movement in that way, where you're going to see some hopeful like progress in eating disorder recovery. Relationship might not be great, but you'll see your kiddo making that progress.
Yeah. And I think even you sound very, like you've done a lot of education, you're pretty sure on what the path is, you're pretty committed to it. And it can be frustrating when you've done that to have the other person, not be on the exact same page and same path as you are. So I think as a partner, focusing on there's fear underneath that resistance is really, really helpful to have you be able to provide some empathy for that position, and then maybe have the conversations a little more calmly in sort of like a, what if this, then that sort of thing. And I'm also, that this made me think of the DBT skill or dialectic behavioral therapy skill of pro con. So I'll send some information on that, but we all heard of a pro and con list, right? Which is that what are the pros of this decision? What are the cons of this decision? A pro con list takes it one step further. So you sort of go, okay, the decision is we're going to go hardcore on FBT. No personal trainer, things are incentives, whatever. What are the pros? What are the cons? And then you do a separate list where you're like, okay, the decision was we give more independence, we get the trainer, we whatever. What are the pros of that? And what are the cons of that? And it sounds a little bit like, oh, we're just doing the same thing, but you're doing it from slightly different viewpoints, and you're doing it twice. And so you kind of really gives you the chance to get very granular on what those things are. I also think it's helpful to do some, exercises around envisioning what will look like if we do this path. What are the possibilities? What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? What are the odds? Different things resonate with different people on that. And so for yourself, trying to be patient and remembering why you married this person, I think very, very helpful. And the fact that you probably do want to get through it. So all of those things together, I think can be helpful. But number one, if you can, get him to agree to Minna Feast, and including the Minna Feast page has a ton of videos that are really great for everyone. But are specifically geared toward men. Maybe you can watch some of those together, that kind of thing. That could be helpful. So hopefully some of those help for you. Let's see. We are just about on time, so we'll just give it just a couple more seconds. Oh, what's the page again? It's called Minna Feast. It looks like you're Googling, Shara. Sure. Yeah.
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 I can then put it in.
Also, I'm going to put a plug in for, and I'm not going to remember if it is this week or next week, and I don't have my 2 computer screens set up. Actually have a dad who wrote a book called Brave Dad Feeding. I believe his name's Kevin, and it might not be. I'm going to feel bad if he hears this and I got the name wrong. So bad without all my notes and things like that. But he's going to be on, and we're going to have a conversation about all of this. So that would also be a great thing for your husband to be able to watch. Yeah, and Cher's got that page up there, so that's really great. Make sure you open that. Oops.
And looks like Sarah wanted to share again, so I'll go ahead and do that.
I'm sorry, I'm driving and I got kicked off and then kicked back on. So I just was wondering if you could quickly and like higher level explain the difference between FBT and then like CBT or DBT, what the major differences are.
Yeah. So FBT or family-based treatment is predicated on several principles, and one of them being take an agnostic cause to why the eating disorder came into play. So it focuses on symptom reduction as the priority, nourishing the brain, those things. It puts the family members or the well people in the family in the driver's seat with the sort of recognizing that eating disorders are different from a lot of other mental illnesses, in that most people with anxiety or depression would like to not have anxiety or depression. And many people with eating disorders would love to, when they're sick, keep the eating disorder. So it's a recognition that it's hard to impossible to fight on their own. So it brings the family in as sort of like, it's a parent's job to feed your child. And so we're going to help and support you to be able to do that, even in this hard time. And you correct me in any places where you want to add in, but CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy would be sort of more focused on the thought processes and things like that, and working more directly with the person themselves. In FBT, individual therapy actually doesn't happen until the person has sort of made a lot more progress with symptom reduction and things like that. One of the ways we sometimes say FBT is food before therapy, with, again, that recognition that we're going to resolve the issues with malnutrition and the uneven nutrition and all of those sorts of things, and extinguish the behaviors. And then we're going to have sort of a more rational person to deal with, who can then engage in therapy. Also would sort of point you out to, and you'll find this on the feast page, and if you also Feast 30-day program would be a good one for you to sign up for. It's really important always for me to say that FBT is currently the treatment that shows the best impact, in some cases the only impact, in some of the illnesses for kids under the age of 18. So commonly referred to as the gold standard approach, and in general, sort of the first line of treatment. The only contraindication for family-based treatment or FBT is if the parents don't want to do it. So looking for buy-in from your kiddo, definitely not necessary, which is one of the reasons why it works. Because in the beginning, I describe it to people is we did it for my daughter before we could do it with my daughter. And that is generally very effective.
Okay.
What would you add to that, Shira?
Not a whole lot, just reiterating that piece of, like, regardless of where weight is, it's really about the therapy is way more effective when somebody's nourished. So, even when folks are doing more of a CBT or like non-FBT approach, like there's not a whole lot of traction until regular, consistent eating and kind of re-nourishing happens. So
Yeah.
Okay.
But it basically, boils down to, it puts you in the driver's seat of managing your child's illness. And as I will often say to people, like, and this was reinforced by our experience, like, generally not best for the mentally ill child to drive what happens. Like, we as parents generally are going to be much better judges of things that, consulting with professionals and things like that. So, and I always want to add too, because I think this reinforces the effectiveness of FBT. There's actually a form of FBT called parent-based treatment or non-conjoined FBT, in which the kid actually never, ever, ever sees a therapist. The parents do. And it has better early outcomes and the same long-term outcomes. So it works maybe a little bit faster in the beginning, and in the end it works the same. So I think that just really enforces that the well people, the caregivers and the family are often the key to this. So hopefully that's
Great.
helpful.
And then just one more, where are, you keep saying the newsletter, where will we find that, or where do I find that with all this information afterwards?
Oh, you'll get, now that you're signed up, every like Monday or Tuesday, you'll get the recording. They do like the recording
Okay.
magic to it. And then there's
Okay.
take notes, and there's a few resources. But
Perfect.
also, again, a Feast 30 days, like you can go through that whole 30-day email program tonight if you want, and you're going to get a lot of
Okay.
phenomenal information in there.
Okay.
Last question, and then we are going to sign off. My daughter hasn't gotten to the purging and binging, so for calorie restriction only. She came to me for help. I don't want this to feel like a punishment. I want her to feel like she's getting what she asked for. How do I make her feel like this without inpatient? That's a really, really good question. And I think it provides the opportunity to mention a paradigm that happens often, which is that motivation only goes so far before it runs smack dab into the eating disorder saying, I don't think so. So even if initially it may feel to you like you're punishing her, you're actually freeing her. And so I think as long as you are compassionate and validating, I can see this is really a struggle for you. I want to support you as best I can. And we need to nourish ourselves, right? It's not optional to not have the full nutrition we need. I think as long as you can keep yourself in that validating, compassionate space while also being firm in what are actually medical realities. Somebody uses an analogy that's really good was if your kid came to you and said, I want to breathe less air, I don't like to breathe air, you wouldn't then like provide them a windowless or an airless room to live in. And so it's sort of that same principle. So just recognizing that there may be some discomfort in it, even though she's asked for help. And the feeling better piece about all of it is a little bit more of a long-term than short-term proposition. So what else would you say to that, Shira?
Just be kind of prepared for the likelihood that she comes and says, I wish I hadn't ever said anything, which deep down is not the case. Like JD was saying, like something made her want to share with you, which means it's not liking how things are going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much everyone for being here. And we're gonna close on this note because I think it's just really lovely. Somebody said, thank you for both sharing your insights and passion. And I always appreciate that, Shira, with when you're on. I just feel like we really do get that sense of that coming through. So I want to thank you for also being here and being so wonderful about things. And thank you. Yeah, thank you, everybody. And yeah, I do believe it's next week that we're going to do Brave Dad feeding. And if it's not, it's the week after that. So definitely that'll be awesome, and tune in for that. We will talk to folks later. Bye.